Hello, hello, all you lovely people. Professor Gray here as we continue our journey through Unit 4 of the course. Recall we're looking at utilitarianism and its limits. Oh, it's been exciting. Oh, maybe. Anyway, recall that utilitarianism is this ethical theory that is particularly concerned with the promotion of the greater good.
The greater good.
Yeah, that's right. The greater, we've seen this a lot. The greater good.
The greater good.
Yes, this idea that we must be concerned with how everyone is affected by your decisions. This idea, of utilitarianism. And so I think now we can safe to say you're becoming an expert on two forms of utility. Well, you don't think you're you guys are learning a lot. By the end of the semester, I think you'll be genuinely surprised at how much you've done in this course. But now, though, I think you're getting comfortable with two forms of utilitarianism. Recall we have the classical utilitarianism of Jeremy Bentham, and then we've seen the deliberative utilitarianism of John Stuart Mill. So if your dad says, like, you're being so utilitarianism, you can turn to dad and be like, Dad, is that classical or deliberative utilitarianism? And your dad will say, good question. I owe you a Coke. Maybe. What? No? Anyway, we've seen then that there is some overlap between these two views of utilitarianism, but we've also seen there are also, of course, major differences, especially when it comes to understanding the nature of happiness and pleasure. Now, in this module, I want to consider some problems and challenges that utilitarianism faces. Because recall a few modules ago, we saw this concern with hedonism. Remember, hedonism is just this idea that well-being is happiness, and happiness is pleasure and absence of pain. And we saw some concerns with hedonism that seem to revolve around, these ideas that, well, maybe there's things we care about that really aren't about happiness, like maybe artistic creativity. Or maybe there's things we care about that don't have to do with pleasure, like loving and caring relationships that are more than just about pleasure. They're about, trust and mutual respect. So again, maybe there's things we care about other than happiness. Maybe there's things we care about other than pleasure. And maybe there's just things we care about other than like mental states and experiences. Don't forget that old experience machine. So again, maybe we do care about living our own lives in reality and having, real interactions with other real people. Again, this idea that having a connection to reality might be important. So it's not just about mental states and our experiences going on in our minds, but it's actually having that connect to reality seems to matter. And perhaps we might ask ourselves, well, we've seen John Stuart Mill, is not a hedonist. He's a eudaemonist. And does he have the same problems? And because I think Mill would say, at least John Stuart Mill would say, well, his notion of eudaemonism is more rich than mere hedonism because, we can explain the value of, like, say, artistic creativity because artistic creativity is an expression of our higher faculties. So a tortured artist, we talked about the tortured artist, might experience a low quantity of pleasure, but that little pleasure that they're actually getting has such a high quality because it's creative with music or art or beauty or whatever, these great things that humans are capable of that animals aren't. So even if they're getting just a tiny drop of that kind of pleasure, the quality of that pleasure is like gold and it's so valuable. But ultimately, as you just heard, John Stuart Mill is still talking about pleasure. And so we still might worry that, you really, like, for instance, maybe Mill can't really he tries, try to capture that value of true friendship. But it seems that friendship is still more than just the pleasure it involves. Yeah, and then again, pleasure is still an experience. Because remember, Mill is all about the pleasure that comes from the higher faculties. Fair enough. But that still is going on, that pleasure is still going on in our minds. And so, if friendship's about other things than pleasure, I don't know how Mill can capture that, even with this rich idea of, and again, if you're not having real contact with the world, it's just the experience of pleasure, Mill might have problems there too. I won't flesh this out anymore because I think you can see on your own how those criticisms of hedonism might have similar style arguments when it comes to eudaimonism. Again, the commonality being they are about happiness and pleasure at the end of the day. They're just very different notions of how to understand pleasure, but it's still pleasure. So maybe those problems with hedonism repeat themselves for eudaimonism. However, I lied. I guess I'll say one thing more, is that maybe Mill would emphasize, that the pleasure he cares about comes from actually using our higher order capacities, actually developing and cultivating these beautiful gifts that nature has bestowed upon us through our sapience. And so Mill might look at the experience machine and be like, you know what? All the experience machine can do is give you the experience of those pleasures. But he still might say they're lacking the real pleasure, because the real pleasure comes from actually developing and actually exercising these, where the machine would just give us the experience of doing that, but we're not, of course, actually doing it. You're just a blob in a tank. Anyhow, I think that's a very interesting way that maybe if you really want to be a utilitarian and you like Mill's notion, maybe there's something there you can work with to escape the pitfalls of hedonism with the value and magic of eudaimonism. I'll leave it alone at that. And there's two other challenges I just want to go over quickly. I'll wave my hands at a little bit here, because these two appear in the reading from James Rachel's and Stuart Rachel's for this module. This is on page 124, 125. If you just look on those two pages there, I'll pop them up there. You get a couple concerns you see I've highlighted, that utilitarianism is too demanding, or utilitarianism disrupts our personal relationships. And I'm not going to go through these in too much detail, because you know what? We have seen these already. And it's, of course, with Peter Singer. Who else would it be? Peter Singer is the one who people accuse of being too demanding and too disconnected from how we understand our personal relationships. Because, for instance, recall Peter Singer talked about world poverty. And remember, he said that we're all obligated to donate a lot more than we do to poverty. And we saw the criticism. This seems really demanding, because it requires that donating to poverty requires we give up too much. At the very least, we have to give up all of our luxuries and donate all that extra wealth to save lives. That's pretty demanding. But of course, it can get even worse, as we saw, that not only are you expected to give up your luxuries, you're expected to give up everything until you're only just marginally better than those in poverty. So you'll be poor. You won't be in poverty, but you will be extremely poor. And so I think that gives us the great example of that utilitarianism is thought to be too demanding. It just requires that you make these great sacrifices if it helps other people. And now the second concern that I threw up there was that about disrupting our personal relationships. And again, I think we can see this in the discussion of Peter Singer on world poverty, because he's implying we should care more about children in poverty than you should care about your own children. If your children are not in poverty, they are less important than the children who are actually in poverty. Or similarly, your other personal relationships with friends and family. As long as those people aren't in poverty, your focus should be on the concern with those who are in poverty and using your time and energy to help them out. And so, of course, though, you might all think, well, no, I should really care more about my friends and family than some strangers living across the world in sub-Saharan Africa. And yeah, we've seen that debate with Peter Singer on world poverty. And also we can see Peter Singer being pretty demanding and pretty disruptive of our personal relations when it comes to animals. Remember, he thought that, you should care about the welfare of animals more than at times anyway, than welfare of your own friends and family and children. Saying, look, some parents would be like, look, if my kid wants chicken nuggets, baby's getting chicken nuggets. I'm sorry, chickens on your little factory farm, because trust me, I'll tell you, McDonald's don't treat their chickens very well. It's a nightmare from probably Purdue Pharma. Anyway, what was I talking about? Baby wants chicken nuggets, baby gets chicken nuggets. Done. End of conversation. So again, we've seen these two problems. That utilitarianism seems demanding. Poverty, caring about animals, pretty demanding. Or it also seems to disrupt our personal relationships, caring about strangers, caring about animals more than our family and other loved ones. And of course, Singer, he's diabolical. Of course, his response, you know how it's going to go. It's always that you should be impartial. You should not prejudice or bias yourself or your families when something or someone else is suffering. So we must consider the interests of the poor and other animals if we truly are to be impartial and not biased. And as always, I'll leave it to you to decide where you come in on that. I can probably guess it's something that demanding is a hard pill to swallow for sure. But what I want to talk about in the rest of this module are some challenges that arise from accepting both consequentialism and from accepting sum ranking. And with sum ranking, I mean either the classical version or the pluralist or the vector sum version. No, it's all sum ranking. It's all about math. I mean, again, the idea is if you may reject pleasure as the greatest good, you may reject happiness as the greatest good. And heck, you might reject well-being as the greatest of the good. So there goes you reject eudaimonism, you reject hedonism, you reject welfarism. So it's not about happiness, it's not about pleasure, it's not about well-being, it's about something else. Fine, there's some utilitarians who actually do that, by the way. But if you accept consequentialism, again, consequentialism is only caring about the goodness of outcomes for everyone involved. And if you combine that concern with sum ranking, that is, you accept that the goodness of outcomes for everyone is determined by by math, by aggregating the sum from all the individual people. Well, you accept that consequentialism, you accept that sum ranking, and let me tell you what, you're going to get some problems. And so I'm going to follow that train of thought throughout this module, and we're going to go to some pretty interesting, deep places and maybe even depressing places along this journey. So first, though, we'll start with the Rachel's and Rachel's article and see the challenges they present for consequentialism and sum ranking. This will be the idea about, when it comes to the greater good, and respect for persons, there seems to be a problem. Second, we'll look at how all that applies to the story from Ursula K. Le Guin, her little story about omelos, and we'll ask ourselves, are we living in omelos? And third and finally, this is going to reveal, all this is going to reveal a concern, a very deep concern that we see in the reading from Bernard Williams about a very troubling connection between utilitarianism and personal integrity. So there's the module there, people. This is going to be, I'm going to have fun. I'll do my best that you do too. But before we take that deep dive into all that, let's take our quick break, and then I'll see you back here in a moment.